Human Accomplishment by Charles Murray. This is my second installment regarding this book, and this one is going to focus on peace and prosperity as two possible explanations for human accomplishment, or as he puts it in the book, producing significant figures. And by that he means people like an Einstein or a Leonardo da Vinci and so forth, a Beethoven, a Bach. So regarding peace and prosperity, what I've done with these slides is I've just basically summarized this short chapter for you, and I'm going to read maybe the last couple of paragraphs at the end. He makes a qualitative case, which I'm summarizing here, and the other half of the chapter, which I'm not summarizing, is the quantitative case upon which he made the qualitative analysis. So if you're into stats, you can, buy the book, get your hands on it somehow, and check it out. But for the rest of us who are not into stats, here's what he has to say. The idea that peace is somehow related to bringing about significant figures or human accomplishment is a common sense idea. But does the quantitative analysis back it up? It seems obvious, but Murray brings up some interesting points. Consider the time between 500 BC and 300 BC in Athens. These are some of the centuries and decades, if you want to get more precise, of the most turmoil for the city-state. Yet, the amount of significant figures produced for a variety of human accomplishments, from engineering to mathematics to philosophy to literature, dwarfs most periods of relative peace in all other places of the world. This ties into something that Nassim Taleb brings up in his book Anti-Fragile. He says that there is a concept we are familiar with, such as PTSD. We know of it as a debilitating disorder produced from stressful environments or experiences, but what people don't often hear about is the reverse, that such experiences can also produce a mental state of extreme human accomplishment, and he calls it post-traumatic growth. And he says there are studies regarding that phenomenon as well. And now, I don't think Murray mentioned this in his analysis, but the two of them did debate human accomplishment one time, and they agreed on a lot. But, of course, in a debate, you try to focus on the points where you disagree. And I think this was one of the points they disagreed about, regarding does the data that Murray found actually demonstrate post-traumatic growth in the case of Athens, because one data point, it's hard to say that is demonstrating post-traumatic growth, but it certainly doesn't hurt the case. And Murray is really a stickler on that data, which is good. It's good to be grounded in some kind of ground your theory in some kind of facts. And I'm not sure what Nassim grounds his belief in post-traumatic growth in. If it's just psychological data and experiments, I'd have to look at the footnotes he uses in Anti-Fragile, and I just haven't done that. But just so you know, there is possibly something called post-traumatic growth that seems to have, in the case of Athens, produced a lot of talent. And it's not just Athens. I don't want to make an oversimplified case that Athens is the only example. There are other examples. It's just there might not be enough examples to really understand it quantitatively. So peace continued. Another thing to consider is that total war is kind of rare. But even in those cases, countries are quick to recover. Germany and Japan post-World War II made remarkable recoveries, which gives us an idea of how impactful even total war can be on human accomplishment. Again, this is just one data point, but it confirms the quantitative analysis that Murray did. So Murray also brings up Florence, the Dutch, and France, all as other examples of how peace can interact with the production of significant figures. So in the case of Florence, it was under constant threat of takeover, violence, or civil unrest during its greatest flourishing of human accomplishment. So while it was producing the most significant figures, it was actually in kind of the worst state for a city-state to be in terms of peace in its history. So the Dutch had their greatest flourishing during times of greatest war and tumult for that country as well. I think their high point started right in the middle of the 30 Years' War. And France, while it had a golden age during peacetime, which is one of the only points you can actually point to where a country had a golden age during peace, politically it was in decline, and internationally it was losing steam. So although it might have been peaceful, it wasn't that great of a time in France, besides for that which it produced the significant figures. In all other cases, it was in decline. So that's kind of a tricky case there. So it seems that peace is a rather neutral factor in considering human accomplishment in any given time period for any given geographical area. If it exists, it doesn't seem to hurt. If it doesn't, sometimes it seems to help, like in the case of Athens, and the post-traumatic growth and such. The bad thing about peace being postulated as grounds for human accomplishment is that there hasn't been enough of it to test this hypothesis rigorously. And that's basically what Murray concludes, is that there are definite times when war can destroy cities and destroy the production of significant figures for a time and a place, but it's kind of rare, and throughout so much of history is just full of conflict that there isn't really enough of a time period of peace to really test this hypothesis well, which is quite startling to think about. In fact, one of his pages, I meant to take a picture of it and post it up here, but I didn't have time. One of the pages, or he lists like a page and a half of conflicts just for one area of Europe, and it's just like one after the other. The 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the this, that. Everything is just always in war, and they're, long drawn-out wars where lots of people died, and sometimes a third of a population might die from these wars. So they weren't just small conflicts. Anyway, so what about the other side of this coin, the prosperity thing? How might that affect human accomplishment? A few interesting examples are cited by Murray regarding prosperity. One is that of Spain in the era of its greatest economic windfall from all the gold and silver flowing into it from the New World. Florence and the Netherlands are also brought up afterwards. So it seems in the case of Spain that a great downturn occurred precisely with their greatest economic boom. They produced next to nothing in terms of human accomplishment, and even had a negative impact in terms of producing something like the Inquisition, which kind of was it lended itself to negative production of significant figures, if you could think of it that way. I was going to read a page out that he had on Spain, but I don't think it's necessary. I want to keep this video kind of short, so I'll just assume you probably know your history a little bit more than I do, and you're familiar with Spain during this time. What Murray does is he cites some sources at the time who are saying that the Spanish people sort of got lazy and didn't want to work. That work was seen as something beneath them, and of course it started at the aristocratic level and worked its way down to the common man, just because they got this huge economic boom. And I think Murray equates it, or someone else that he cites equates it to a windfall someone might have if they won the lottery or inherited a lot of wealth. So the first generation who worked hard for the money, they may have the proper work ethic, but their children who don't have to work for the money and just inherit the family fortune, they might be kind of messed up with regard to the work ethic. And this seemed to happen to the whole nation of Spain in this, I think there's about a 150-year time period that we're talking about, maybe 200 years. So from this one extreme example, you might conclude that the great wealth has negative impacts on human accomplishment, because Spain really didn't produce anybody of great importance, while other countries and much smaller countries were producing hundreds of people. So what about Florence? Florence provides another interesting case. It is widely assumed that because of its prosperity it produced great art, but it was actually in the midst of a great recession or depression, or however you want to describe an economic decline, and that all the great art was produced. So this in turn suggests that, quote, smart money flows into art during such times of economic depression, and I think we still see this to this day. The Netherlands provides the last example of interest. In their case, prosperity did lend itself to the production of significant figures. And as their prosperity slowed, it kind of just declined. It never really got to where they were unprosperous. They were just one of the wealthy countries in Europe. Their production of significant figures kind of disappeared. So it's kind of an interesting example. So one final conclusion Murray draws about prosperity is that it seems from the quantitative analysis that raw prosperity doesn't matter as much as relative prosperity. And I think Jordan Peterson brings this up to some degree as well. It seems that prosperity is necessary to produce significant figures because without excess beyond the natural needs for survival, like you need clothing, a place to live, food in your belly in order to work. Beyond that, the necessities, the bare necessities, humanity has no time to think about the things having to do with that which is beyond the next meal, the next shelter, or the next piece of firewood. So once your basic necessities are met, then you start to have time to think about other things, right? So you need some level of prosperity to afford your society time to think. And what's interesting is a lot of the great thinkers are the people, or the great figures, or the people who sort of moved cultures or countries in one direction or the other towards the better, tended to be people who had time on their hands. I think they were called ivory tower thinkers or something. So they tended to be either wealthy and sit in their ivory towers philosophizing and having the time to think about what's going on in their culture, or they a lot of the times tended to be parish priests, some kind of minister who also had some time on his hands and was thinking about how things worked. An interesting example of the minister who is thinking about what's going on in his society could be Paul Vanderklay. He's an interesting example of someone who is afforded the time to pursue something that he finds interesting and that is significant to a lot of people. So, but anyway, so this leads us to ask, what produces a culture that produces such prosperity, such wealth, at least at a level that gets the process started? So where your basic needs are met, where you can then start to have people thinking about other things than providing basic needs for themselves and their families. And I think this is what we're going to come to with the next few examples. And so where am I going with the series? So it seems not much of a conclusion can be drawn about peace as the ground for human accomplishment. Prosperity seems at a base level necessary, but it begs the question, so what causes this prosperity? It also leaves us wondering what level of prosperity is best, because in both extremes, the impact on producing significant figures seems negative. There seems to be something else that is contributing to the production of significant figures, and the beauty of a multivariate analysis is that we shall explore as much of those variables as we know how to. So where am I going next? Well, Murray investigates models, elite cities, and freedom of action as the next three variables we're gonna look at in regards to human accomplishment. Then we're going to look at the Aristotelian principle and Thomas Aquinas, because I started this series because I kept mentioning Thomas Aquinas in this Charles Murray book about human accomplishment and how he fits in. But I think to understand how he fits in, you really have to get a grasp on what I did last time, which was how population matters, which it really doesn't, except for Europe and America, and I explained why that was there. And I went over peace and prosperity. So how do those things matter? Well, not to a really significant degree, except for prosperity in regards to meeting your basic needs. I think I'm going to skip just that last few paragraphs because I wanted this video to stay under 15 minutes. So anyway, so all things considered, we should come away with a good idea as to why societies produce significant figures at any given time and place. And if you like these sorts of things, don't forget to give the video a like and please subscribe. Thank you.